Desmond Tutu's new book called The Book of Forgiving, he said there's no end to human capacity for healing. And just as what Jean-Paul has illustrated in his story, forgiveness is actually an important pathway towards healing. However, others may not agree. Others, especially those people who live in those continued divided societies, such as Northern Ireland, where there's a lack of access to economic or social and political resources, and those kind of turbulent history remain contested. In this situation, people would say forgiveness is not enough. Healing can only happen when there's justice. So I put out there as a bridge, so that you can work on to start your bit of the talk for this evening. Thank you.
Trauma is a word which effectively describes an experience of dehumanization. And to believe after dehumanization in the possibility of rehumanization is sometimes to believe in something like a miracle. Tim Snyder again said this: no major war or act of mass killing in the 20th century began without the aggressors or perpetrators first claiming innocence and victimhood. The truth is that many of our traumas have behind them a claim that we first were traumatized. So unresolved trauma, when we're talking about unresolved trauma, what we are talking about is a defining legacy of violence which continues to confine and define our development to the point of neurosis, which suppurates and decays in us, poisoning us and our community, and rankling with it because it finds no justice. Festering trauma has the capacity of also being festering dehumanization. Northern Ireland has been described in many ways, but one of them is as a factory of grievances. One grievance leads people to act in one way, which leads to another grievance, which leads people to act in another way, and the system simply reproduces grievance after grievance after grievance. And I want to say, I know I only have 5 more minutes, so I want to just say something very, very quickly about that. First of all, if you fear your neighbour, you cannot risk equality with them. And so the grievance continues for your neighbour. Equality is a great idea, but if equality was something who's going to kill you, is the risk. The huge motivation is the inequality as completely justified and necessary. And so we create a new set of grievances. In Ireland, the truth is that maintaining power was justified because not to maintain power was to risk death. Finally, and this is perhaps most important, is we understand ourselves ultimately to be the victims. They are responsible. We agree on who the problem is. Them. We can do nothing. We are the abused, they are the abuser. And most difficult of all, once we know that deeply in our culture, we are the abused and they are the abuser, the consequence is that the only peace which is just between the abused and the abuser is the victory of the abused. So the only peace that is just is victory. And anybody who is selling you peace short of victory is selling you injustice. And so the peacemakers, those who would try to find peace outside of victory, are immediately accused of betrayal. And so the extremist becomes the hero, and so the only person who's really standing up for justice. By far the hardest part of building a shared future is not politics, it is the rehumanization of relationships, because it involves us. They talk in peacemaking about hard and soft. The hard stuff is the politics, the soft stuff is the relationships. Let me tell you, it's hard and harder. It's not hardly so. It's hard and harder. Rebuilding the trust that humanity is possible is a much more difficult task, simply because it cannot be guaranteed by power. It requires a risk, exactly as you talked about here. And it cannot be legislated. It requires people to take steps. To forgive is not to forget, but it is to place rehumanization at the front of what we do, and to say that there is no justice which does not take us back towards rehumanization, and no justice which allows us to stay where we are in justifying cruelty as heroism.
Can you help us understand the transgenerational trauma a bit better? Thank you.
If I was a mouse, very little mouse, my grandparents were traumatized on purpose to be frightened of cherry blossom. They have just now found out that I would be traumatized on cherry blossom. Now, a lot of us in this room know that that is perfectly a normal thing. Scientists have only just woken up to that.
And I think sometimes we probably go more towards the ancestral trauma than we do towards the ancestral gifts. I know that I started wondering about how many of my relations, when I was in Lebanon, and wondering about why the hell I was there. And I realised that I'd been born in a war here in the UK, refugee as a child. My mother was born in the revolution, which wasn't born, she was refugeed out of Russia. My grandparents were refugeed out of Russia, but then refugeed 3 or 4 times. It was non-stop memory of war. My father was in every war you could possibly imagine. I mean, it was like hundreds of years of war. And one day I began to cry for some reason, and I cried for 3 years. And I think we're talking about grief. And I didn't know where that came from, but I think that it is a really good idea to cry, the crying that we don't know where it comes from, and to let it out. And maybe those streams of cherry blossom memories can come through and come out. So just a nice quote by Roger Wilker, who said, was a friend, "It is the responsibility of the living to heal the dead. Otherwise, unfinished business will continue to be played out in our fears, phobias, and illnesses." When I was wondering about all this interaction between the past and the present, I came to the place when I really wanted to know what we could do. How do we shift these terrible memories that are mostly unconscious, not even conscious? Working with past fighters who have gone through it and who've become conscious of what they did, and of the agony it is to live with having killed thousands and thousands of people. And I worked very deeply and a long time with 2 particular people, and I had to travel across America with them and having breakfast, lunch and tea with both of them, knowing that and with them telling me what they'd done at particular times to particular people. And it was really a test of my own forgiveness of man's inhumanity to man, that I could look them in the eye and see them. This was my test, that I could just see them as human beings and not as the killers. And what was important was that for them to be seen as not a killer, to be seen as a human being, and that humanness to come back from fear, because we lose our humanity when we go into fear. That's the only way we lose our humanity, is through fear. If we can raise people up out of that level of fear, which I think is the job of all of us, whether it's with a small child or an old person about to die, or whoever it is, or somebody who's just about to take up arms and go and fight some jihad somewhere, is to take them, lift them from the fear, which is at one level of humanity, and lift them to a higher level of themselves.